Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on our chilling tales and deep dives into the shadows of human nature. Today, we're stepping into a story so dark, so meticulously planned, it sent shivers down the spine of an entire nation. It's a saga of betrayal, vengeance, and a silent killer hiding in plain sight. This isn't just a tale of murder. It's a slow burn of retribution, a meticulously crafted web spun over decades, culminating in a series of events that would leave the American elite utterly aghast. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to unravel the horrifying truth behind the Butler's reckoning, a story that shook the very foundations of trust and privilege in the United States. The Ashworth estate, perched atop a secluded hill overlooking the sprawling, glittering expanse of Los Angeles, was more than just a house. It was a fortress of old money, impeccable taste, and deeply buried secrets. For 3 decades, Elias Thorne had presided over its immaculate halls, a spectral presence in a perfectly tailored uniform. He was the quintessential British butler, a paragon of discretion, efficiency, and unwavering loyalty. Or so they thought. Elias Thorne, with his iron-gray hair, precise movements, and in gaze that seemed to miss nothing yet reveal even less, was an institution within the Ashworth household. He poured their morning coffee, laid out their evening wear, managed their sprawling staff, and anticipated their every whim before it was even fully formed in their minds. He was their rock, their shadow, the silent guardian of their opulent, careless lives. Yet, beneath that veneer of perfect servitude simmered a hatred so profound, so patiently nurtured. It was a wonder the very air around him didn't crackle with its intensity. His real name was not Elias Thorne. It was Elias Maxwell, and the Ashworths, in their gilded ignorance, were responsible for every scar etched upon his soul, every loss that had hollowed out his family. The story of Elias's vengeance began not in the polished grandeur of the Ashworth estate, but in the grime and struggle of a forgotten industrial town in Pennsylvania, nearly 40 years prior. The Maxwell family had been humble, hard-working, and proud. Elias's father, Samuel Maxwell, owned a small but innovative textile mill, his life's work. His older sister, Clara, was a vibrant, artistic soul, full of laughter and dreams. Young Elias, then barely a teenager, adored them both. Their world shattered when Ashworth Industries, the behemoth corporation owned by the patriarch Arthur Ashworth Sr., moved into town. Arthur Ashworth, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness, saw Samuel's mill not as a competitor to be respected, but as a small, inconvenient obstacle to be crushed. Ashworth Industries, through predatory pricing, aggressive market manipulation, and ultimately, a smear campaign engineered by Arthur Sr. himself, systematically dismantled Samuel Maxwell's business. Samuel, proud and unwilling to sell his legacy for pennies, fought back, but Ashworth's legal team, led by a cadre of ruthless lawyers, twisted every contract, exploited every loophole. The financial ruin was immediate and devastating. The Maxwells lost everything. But the real tragedy, the wound that would fester in Elias's heart for decades, was the humiliation and despair that followed. Clara, always sensitive, found herself the subject of cruel gossip fueled by Ashworth's local representatives, her reputation sullied by manufactured rumors linking her to Samuel's supposed financial mismanagement. Unable to bear the shame, and with her dreams of attending art school crushed, Clara took her own life. Elias found her. Her final, silent plea for understanding, etched in her eyes, became his lifelong torment. Samuel Maxwell, already broken by the loss of his mill and his daughter, plunged into a deep depression. In a desperate, drunken moment of grief and rage, he confronted one of Ashworth's local managers, resulting in a minor scuffle. Ashworth's legal team, eager to silence any further dissent, pressed charges, exaggerating the incident. Samuel was convicted of assault and died in prison a year later, a broken man, his spirit extinguished by injustice. Elias, barely 16, was left utterly alone. He watched as the Ashworths, from their distant, opulent world, reveled in their expanded empire, oblivious to the devastation they had wrought. He attended his father's pauper's funeral, a silent, hollow shell of his former self. It was there, amidst the cold, damp earth of his father's grave, that a seed of vengeance, as hard and unyielding as granite, was planted deep within him. He made a vow: the Ashworths would pay. Every single one of them. Not swiftly, not carelessly, but slowly, meticulously, piece by agonizing piece, until their empire, and their family, crumbled into the same dust that now covered his own. The path to becoming Elias Thorne was a long, arduous one. He spent years in the shadows, educating himself, observing the world of the wealthy. He devoured books on chemistry, poisons, psychology, security systems, and human behavior. He learned to control his emotions, to project an air of calm subservience, to become invisible while simultaneously being indispensable. He perfected an accent, polished his manners, and adopted a new identity. He served in lesser households, learning the intricate workings of the elite, understanding their vulnerabilities, their habits, their self-important blindness. He became the epitome of a perfect domestic servant, a master of deception. His opportunity came 3 decades later. The Ashworths, a new generation now at the helm, were seeking a new head butler. Arthur Ashworth Jr., the current patriarch, was a man in his late 60s, a carbon copy of his father in his arrogance and disregard for others. His wife, Eleanor, was a socialite draped in jewels and a perpetual air of elegant dissatisfaction. Their eldest son, Roderick, was a slick, ambitious businessman, mirroring his father's ruthlessness without any of his father's strategic cunning. Their daughter, Vivian, was a fragile beauty, prone to bouts of melancholia and addiction to designer drugs. And Julian, the youngest, was a charming but directionless playboy, living off the family fortune. Elias, now Thorne, applied. His impeccable references, his decades of experience, and his utterly unflappable demeanor made him the ideal candidate. He projected an aura of quiet competence, a man who would fade into the background, overseeing everything without ever being seen. He was hired on the spot. His first years at the Ashworth estate were a masterclass in observation and infiltration. He mapped the house inside and out. He learned their schedules, their allergies, their medications, their deepest fears, and their most trivial annoyances. He noted the hidden liquor stashes, the secret affairs, the financial indiscretions, the fault lines running through the family like cracks in an ancient vase. He became the silent confessor, the holder of their secrets, their confidant in moments of weakness, all while meticulously cataloging their vulnerabilities. The grand library, with its leather-bound volumes, became his sanctuary and his laboratory. Here, amidst the Ashworth's treasured collection, Elias began to experiment. He researched untraceable compounds, poisons that mimicked natural diseases, substances that could subtly alter mood or exacerbate existing conditions. His mind, once fueled by raw grief, was now a cold, calculating machine. His first target was Eleanor Ashworth. Eleanor was a woman consumed by vanity and a litany of perceived ailments. She obsessed over her appearance, her weight, her youth, and her health, constantly consulting specialists for minor aches and imaginary illnesses. She was the one who had, years ago, scoffed at the poor Maxwell girls' theatrics, trivializing Clara's suffering. Elias remembered. He began subtly. A change in her morning tea, a dash of a colorless, tasteless compound that, over time, would subtly interfere with her metabolism and thyroid function, mimicking the onset of a degenerative illness. He knew her aversion to doctors who couldn't immediately fix her tendency to self-medicate with an ever-changing cocktail of prescription pills. He replaced some of her less critical medications with placebos, further confusing her doctors. He added small, unnoticeable doses of heavy metals to her rare vintages of wine, compounds that would slowly accumulate, leading to chronic fatigue, cognitive decline, and organ damage. Eleanor's health began to deteriorate in slow, agonizing increments. Her once vibrant complexion became sallow, her sharp wit dulled. She suffered from unexplained tremors, chronic fatigue, and bouts of confusion. Doctors were baffled. They attributed it to age, stress, hypochondria, or a rare, undiagnosed autoimmune condition. The family, particularly Arthur Jr., grew impatient, seeing her as a burden, her constant complaints disrupting their social calendar. Elias, ever the solicitous butler, was always there, offering a comforting word, a perfectly brewed herbal tea, or a special blend of vitamins he claimed were from an obscure European apothecary, each carefully laced with a little something extra to accelerate her decline. He watched her, his face a mask of concern, his internal monologue a symphony of grim satisfaction. He recalled Clara's fading light, her body racked not by illness, but by the poison of despair. Eleanor's suffering, a slow, drawn-out fade, was merely a fraction of the agony his own family had endured. One cold December morning, almost 2 years after Elias had begun his insidious work, Eleanor Ashworth was found unresponsive in her bed. The cause of death was listed as a massive stroke, complicated by a rare, aggressive form of metabolic disease. The doctors, weary from years of treating her vague symptoms, signed the death certificate with a shrug. Arthur Jr. shed a few perfunctory tears, mostly for the inconvenience of rescheduling his golf game, and the Ashworth children expressed relief, tinged with a hollow grief, that their mother was finally at peace. Elias Thorne oversaw the funeral arrangements with his usual unflappable efficiency. He stood by the freshly dug grave, a solemn figure amongst the mourners, a single, almost imperceptible tremor running through his gloved hand. The first one was down. The seed had been planted, nurtured, and had now borne its first bitter fruit. The Ashworth curse, as some would later whisper, had truly begun. And Elias, the silent conductor of this macabre symphony, was just getting started. Eleanor Ashworth's death, while formally attributed to natural causes, cast a long, unsettling shadow over the Ashworth estate. The family's initial relief quickly morphed into a simmering paranoia. Each ache, each unexplained cough, became a potential harbinger of doom. Elias Thorne, observing from the periphery, noted these shifts with a cool, clinical eye. He had masterfully orchestrated the perfect blend of plausibility and lingering dread. Arthur Ashworth Jr., the patriarch, retreated further into his study, his whiskey consumption increasing, his temper shortening. He was a man accustomed to control, and his wife's inexplicable demise had chipped away at his carefully constructed reality. He suspected nothing, of course, but the unsettling feeling that something was off gnawed at him. He became more demanding of Elias, clinging to the butler's meticulous routine as a last bastion of order in a world suddenly feeling chaotic. Roderick Ashworth, the eldest son, was the quintessential predator, sharp-suited and sharper-tongued. He saw his mother's death as an opportunity, launching immediately into a ruthless campaign to consolidate his inheritance and push his own business ventures, often at the expense of his siblings. His arrogance was boundless, his empathy non-existent. Elias remembered Roderick's father's words during the initial hostile takeover of the Maxwell Mill. "Some people just aren't cut out for the big leagues, Thorne. Weakness gets you nowhere." Roderick, in his callous ambition, was a direct descendant of that same destructive mentality. He was next. Roderick's vices were an open book to Elias. He was a reckless gambler, a womanizer, and a speed demon behind the wheel of his collection of vintage sports cars. He also had a severe, unacknowledged heart condition, a hereditary flaw he refused to address, relying on a daily cocktail of stimulants and mild beta blockers to keep himself going. Elias had meticulously documented this, noting the subtle telltale signs, the beads of sweat on his forehead during high-stakes calls, the brief, sharp intakes of breath. Elias began his work on Roderick with the same insidious precision. He started subtly altering Roderick's energy drinks, a blend of exotic teas and supplements Roderick insisted on for his busy schedule by adding compounds that subtly interfered with his blood pressure and heart rhythm. He also ensured that Roderick's nightly scotch, often poured by Elias himself, was laced with trace amounts of muscle relaxants that would exacerbate his existing heart issues when combined with his other medications and high-stress lifestyle. He meticulously ensured that no single dose was lethal, but the cumulative effect was slowly, steadily eroding Roderick's already fragile cardiovascular system. Simultaneously, Elias began planting subtle seeds of discord between Roderick and Arthur Jr. He accidentally left incriminating documents detailing Roderick's questionable business dealings, some legitimate, some fabricated by Elias for Arthur to discover. He subtly exaggerated Roderick's dismissive remarks about his father's outdated business acumen. The Ashworth patriarch, already feeling his age and the weight of his wife's death, grew increasingly suspicious and resentful of his ambitious son. Their arguments became more frequent, more vicious, often overheard by the seemingly impassive Butler. Roderick, under increasing pressure from his father, his failing business ventures, subtly sabotaged by Elias through misfiled documents and delayed communications, and the insidious effects of Elias's poisons, became more erratic. He drank more, drove faster, and took more risks. One stormy night, after a particularly brutal confrontation with Arthur Jr. about a failing investment, Roderick stormed out of the mansion, keys to his vintage Ferrari in hand. Elias, silently observing from the shadows of the foyer, noted the telltale flush in Roderick's face, the tremor in his hands, clear signs of his deteriorating heart health exacerbated by stress and a generous serving of Elias's doctored scotch. Earlier that day, while performing routine maintenance on the family vehicles, Elias had subtly loosened a critical brake line on Roderick's Ferrari, just enough to cause a delayed, catastrophic failure under extreme pressure. He knew Roderick's habit of speeding, especially when angry. Hours later, the news broke. Roderick Ashworth had veered off a winding canyon road, his pristine Ferrari plummeting hundreds of feet into a ravine. The official report cited excessive speed, treacherous conditions, and an apparent medical event, likely a heart attack, as contributing factors. The brake failure was attributed to the impact. Arthur Jr. was devastated, reeling from the loss of his heir, the bitterness of their last argument hanging heavy in the air. Vivian, Roderick's sister, sank deeper into her self-medicating haze, finding solace in her illicit prescriptions. Julian, the youngest, genuinely grieved, seeing his brother's recklessness as a tragic flaw, not a predetermined fate. But one person was not entirely convinced. Detective Harding. Harding was a seasoned LAPD detective, a man with a keen eye for detail and an instinct that had saved his career more than once. He'd been tangentially involved in Eleanor's case, finding the metabolic disease diagnosis a little too convenient, a little too neat. Now, Roderick's death, following so closely, felt of two prominent members of the same wealthy family, dying tragically within a year of each other. It was either the worst run of bad luck in Los Angeles history, or something far more sinister was at play. He visited the Ashworth estate, his presence a jarring note in its pristine elegance. Elias Thorne was, as always, the picture of professional grief and solicitude, offering tea and condolences. Harding found himself strangely drawn to the butler, sensing an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite place. Elias's eyes, though outwardly deferential, held a depth that belied his subservient role. "A terrible tragedy, Mr. Thorne," Harding remarked, watching Elias carefully wipe down a crystal glass. "Two losses so close together. This family seems to be under a dark cloud." "Indeed, Detective," Elias replied, his voice a smooth, modulated baritone. "Life can be cruelly unpredictable, even for the most fortunate." He met Harding's gaze for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before returning to his task. Harding pressed. He reviewed medical reports, accident scene photos, financial documents. He found no evidence of foul play in either case, no direct link. But the patterns, the subtle inconsistencies, gnawed at him. Eleanor's doctors had seemed too quick to write her off. Roderick's medical event was convenient, yet his heart condition had never been officially diagnosed or severe enough for such a sudden collapse. He noticed a strange commonality. In the periphery of every major event, Elias Thorne was always present, always the last to see, the first to find, the most helpful. Yet he was always beyond suspicion. Harding began to shadow Elias, discreetly checking his background, his movements. He found nothing. Elias Thorne was a ghost, a perfect professional, his past meticulously scrubbed clean. He had no known family, no close friends outside the household staff, and a flawless record stretching back decades. He was too perfect, Harding thought, unsettlingly so. Meanwhile, within the Ashworth estate, the atmosphere grew increasingly toxic. Arthur Jr. was a broken man, consumed by guilt and grief, lashing out at Vivian and Julian. Vivian, already fragile, found no solace. Her grief for Roderick, combined with her mother's slow, baffling demise, pushed her deeper into her dependency on prescription pills, procured through a discreet, well-paid network of doctors and pharmacies. Julian, the youngest Ashworth, now felt the crushing weight of expectation. He was the last male heir, unprepared for the responsibility and terrified. He started seeing shadows, hearing whispers, convinced the house itself was haunted, or that a curse truly had fallen upon them. He saw the coldness in his father's eyes, the way Vivian retreated. He turned to Elias, the steady, comforting presence, for guidance, for a sense of normalcy. Elias, ever the empathetic listener, offered a shoulder, a soothing word, and began to subtly adjust Julian's daily routine, noting his sleep patterns, his anxieties, his vulnerabilities. The Ashworths were not just grieving, they were unraveling, and Elias Thorne, the silent weaver, was meticulously tightening the threads, preparing for the next, inevitable cut. The harvest of discord was ripening, and soon, it would be time for the reapers to claim their due. Harding watched, helpless, a gut feeling against an insurmountable wall of carefully constructed facts. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he wasn't looking at a string of tragedies, but a master at work. And he was racing against time to find the truth before the next victim fell. The Ashworth estate, once a vibrant hub of wealth and influence, had become a mausoleum of quiet despair. 2 deaths had transformed Arthur Ashworth Jr. into a spectral figure, haunted by his losses and his own fading power. Vivian, the daughter, spiraled further into her drug dependency, barely leaving her room. Julian, the youngest, wandered the halls like a ghost, his youthful exuberance replaced by a constant, palpable fear. Elias Thorne, the ever-present butler, was now the de facto ruler of the house, his authority unchallenged, his movements unimpeded. The family, broken and consumed by their grief and paranoia, barely noticed his absolute control. Detective Harding, despite his fervent suspicions, had hit a wall. Every lead fizzled, every autopsy report was inconclusive, every background check on Elias Thorne came up clean. He tried interviewing the remaining staff, but they all spoke of Thorne with a mixture of reverence and fear. A man so efficient, so knowledgeable, he was practically part of the architecture. There was no crack in the facade. Harding, however, was a bulldog. He knew something was wrong, and the chilling thought that the killer was still among them, a silent architect of their downfall, drove him relentlessly. He began to stake out the estate, watching, waiting, hoping for a misstep. Vivian Ashworth became Elias's next target. She was the most fragile, the most susceptible. Elias remembered Clara's delicate spirit, crushed by the world's cruelty. Vivian, though born to privilege, was similarly vulnerable, her artistic soul choked by the Ashworth's cold ambition and her own internal demons. Her casual dismissal of the tragedies that befell her family, her self-absorbed grief, solidified Elias's resolve. She represented the unfeeling legacy, even if her direct transgressions were less than her father's or brother's. Elias began to systematically increase the potency of Vivian's illicit drug supply, which he had subtly started to manage for her. He replaced her usual doses with stronger, more dangerous variations, gradually escalating the toxicity. He also exploited her emotional fragility, subtly manipulating her deepest fears and insecurities. He would accidentally leave articles about her mother's mysterious illness and Roderick's reckless death on her bedside table. He would whisper subtle, comforting lies about the peace her mother and brother had found, subtly planting the idea of escape from her own suffering. He fostered a sense of utter hopelessness around her. He would intercept messages from her few remaining friends, isolating her further. He would ensure her preferred comfort foods were suddenly unavailable, her favorite music lost, her room always just a little too cold. He created an environment of slow, psychological torture, exacerbating her depression and addiction until she became entirely reliant on the solace her drugs provided. One rain-swept afternoon, Vivian Ashworth was found in her private sitting room, surrounded by empty pill bottles. The official cause of death was an accidental overdose, a tragic consequence of her long-standing battle with addiction and depression. The police, accustomed to such endings among the wealthy elite, found no immediate reason for suspicion. A suicide note, seemingly scrawled in her own hand, spoke of unbearable grief and a desire to join her mother and brother. Elias had meticulously crafted it, mimicking her handwriting, blending it seamlessly with her genuine despair. Julian Ashworth, the last surviving child, found his sister. The sight broke him. He stumbled through the house, screaming, weeping, convinced that a dark entity was consuming his family. Arthur Jr., numb with a grief so profound it had become a physical weight, simply stared straight ahead, his eyes hollow. He had lost everything. His wife, his heir, his only daughter. Only Julian remained. Elias Thorne was there, of course, a pillar of strength amidst the chaos. He offered Julian a calming tea, a shoulder to cry on. "The pain will pass, young master," he whispered, his voice a balm. "You are strong, you will endure." The tea, however, was laced with a powerful sedative, ensuring Julian would sleep for hours, leaving Arthur Jr. utterly alone. This was the moment Elias had waited for 40 long years. Arthur Ashworth Jr. sat in his vast, silent study, whiskey bottle in hand, gazing blankly at the roaring fire. He was a shell of a man, his arrogance stripped away by an unrelenting tide of tragedy. Elias entered without a sound, a silent predator. He stood before Arthur, not as a servant, but as an avenging angel. "Another tragedy, Thorne," Arthur mumbled, his voice hoarse. "This house is cursed. My family, gone." Elias said nothing for a long moment, allowing the silence to stretch, thick with unspoken truths. Then, in a voice Arthur had never heard, a voice devoid of its usual subservient tone, a voice that thrummed with ancient pain, he spoke. "Not cursed, Mr. Ashworth. Reaped." Arthur slowly turned, his eyes unfocusing, trying to comprehend. What did you say, Thorne?" Elias stepped closer, his form casting a long shadow over the broken man. "My name is not Thorne. It is Maxwell. Elias Maxwell." Arthur's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition, then dawning horror. The name, buried deep in his memory, resurfaced, a ghost from a past he had dismissed as insignificant. "Maxwell? The mill? My father." "Your father?" Elias interjected, his voice chillingly calm. "Destroyed my family. He took my father's livelihood, his honor. He fabricated the lies that drove my sister, Clara, to her grave. He ensured my father died in prison, a broken man. You, Mr. Ashworth, inherited his empire, and you inherited his sins." Arthur tried to push himself up from his chair, a sudden surge of fear giving him strength. "This is madness. Get out. I'll call the police." Elias merely smiled, a cold, empty gesture. "The police, Mr. Ashworth, are quite occupied with your family's tragic string of misfortunes, and I assure you, no one is coming to help you." He held up a small, ornate silver locket, one Elias had found tucked away in a dusty box of his mother's old things, a tiny, faded photo of Clara, smiling. "This is Clara, my sister. You remember her, don't you?" "Perhaps not." She was just another casualty in your family's relentless pursuit of power. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, exquisite vial, filled with a colorless liquid. This, Mr. Ashworth, is a special blend. Untraceable. It will induce a heart attack so profound, so natural, that even Detective Harding, with his tiresome suspicions, will find nothing. Arthur stared at the vial, then at the man who had served him for 30 years. The perfect butler, the silent shadow, was now his judge, jury, and executioner. The realization of the scope of Elias's revenge, the decades of meticulous planning, the utter betrayal, crushed him more completely than any grief. You killed them all? Eleanor? Roderick? Vivian? He whispered, his voice barely audible. I merely facilitated their destinies, Mr. Ashworth, just as your family facilitated ours, Elias stated, his hand steady as he poured the liquid into Arthur's whiskey glass. Drink it. It will be painless. Far more painless than what my family endured. Arthur Ashworth, Jr., stripped of his arrogance, his power, and his family, met Elias's gaze. He saw no hatred there, only a profound, ancient sorrow, hardened into an unyielding resolve. He saw a man who had waited an entire lifetime for this moment. With a trembling hand, Arthur lifted the glass. He understood. He finally understood. He drank. Elias watched, impassive, as Arthur Ashworth, Jr. gasped, clutched his chest, and slumped forward, his body hitting the study floor with a dull thud. The Ashworth line was extinguished. Elias Thorne, no, Elias Maxwell, meticulously wiped down the glass, placed it back on the tray, and then, with practiced ease, cleaned every surface he might have touched. He rearranged the room, making it appear as if Arthur had died naturally, alone in his study, overwhelmed by grief and the burden of his family's tragedies. He then placed the locket, with Clara's fading image, carefully into Arthur's outstretched hand. A final, silent message. He walked out of the study, locking the door behind him. He found Julian, still heavily sedated, peaceful in his bed. He ensured the young man would wake to discover his father's passing. Elias then quietly packed a small bag, leaving behind the perfectly tailored uniform, the symbol of his 30-year deception. He left the Ashworth estate in the pre-dawn hours, a ghost finally released from its haunting. Hours later, Julian discovered his father. The medical examiner, after a thorough review, confirmed Arthur Ashworth, Jr. had died of a massive myocardial infarction. The locket was dismissed as a sentimental antique Arthur must have kept. The string of Ashworth deaths was officially closed, attributed to a combination of natural causes, unfortunate accidents, and tragic addiction. The media, no longer able to sensationalize the Ashworth curse, moved on. Detective Harding, however, never let it go. He stood in the silent, empty Ashworth estate days later, staring at the meticulously clean surfaces, the perfectly arranged furniture. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Elias Thorne was the killer. He had seen the way Thorne moved, the look in his eyes. But he had no proof. Nothing. The perfect crime. Elias Maxwell vanished without a trace, a phantom in the annals of criminal history. He carried with him only the quiet satisfaction of a vow fulfilled, the bitter taste of justice served. The Ashworths were gone. Their empire crumbled, their legacy tainted by a string of tragedies that would forever be whispered about in the high echelons of American society. And the name Maxwell, once crushed beneath the heel of their ambition, had finally, meticulously, had its reckoning.